Welcome to Great Companies, Great Leaders. I'm your host, Kristin Gannon. I am the founder and CEO of Brightworks Consulting, and we are a boutique consulting firm helping companies solve for DE&I at the local level, whether it's developing an entire strategy or it's just providing the latest best practices and policies. We offer a roadmap for companies to improve their culture. And today we're honored to host another phenomenal leader. We have Kristin E+I, who is the Director of Community Entrepreneurship at ASU, Arizona State University, ASU's J. Orrin Edson Entrepreneurship and Innovation Institute. Welcome.
Welcome. You got the whole title in and everything.
I know. Don't say it 3 times fast.
Exactly.
As the Director of Community Entrepreneurship, Kristin helps develop local entrepreneurial ecosystems, and we're going to talk a little bit about that, and supports the activation of place-based innovation spaces networks. Kristin is a community builder. I can totally vouch for that. Working with entrepreneurs and community partners to create thriving entrepreneurial ecosystems. She has led several transformative ecosystem building projects in a diversity of communities. She's an alum of ASU. She has a master's in organizational communications from Texas A&M, and she has a variety of professional certifications as a small business counselor, a mentor, and a facilitator. Welcome.
Yay, and now you also reminded me I need to update that. I just got another certification that's on there. So thank you for that, for the introduction and the amazing reading of the bio. Reminder, I'll put that on my to-do list.
Yes. Well, so excited that you're with us today. Can you start, let's start our conversation with a little bit about your career journey. How did you get to where you are today?
Great question. I mean, it's always a wandering one, right? Which is why it always makes a fascinating podcast topic. Is I much like we talk about the entrepreneurial journey, and mine is very much so an entrepreneurial journey in the way that you start one place, different times you have different roles, and you never quite know where it started. I would actually say a lot of my journey started. So I'm a Phoenix native, went to Arizona State University for my undergrad, and in college is really where I started to explore the part of me that was a community builder. It was, I was working full time, going to school. And for me, a degree really provided me with opportunities to explore like what I liked and what I didn't like and what I liked about learning. And in a haphazard way, and this is a pretty good story, like I was originally in theater in high school. I loved theater. I loved performing. But when I went to college, had to work full time, didn't have the capacity. And then I was sitting in a class one day and a graduate student, one of the TAs, came in and he goes, "Hey, I think you'd be really good at this." And he handed me a flyer for the Vagina Monologues audition.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I was kind of at first taken back, grew up in the suburbs, right? I was like, what? What does this even mean? And he was like, he goes, it's a fundraiser. They raise around $60,000 every year, and they give it back to different nonprofits. And it's on the weekends. I know you've talked, and I had shared with him before that I really missed my public speaking, my theater, because I didn't have time. But it was a volunteer, so it was a much lower bar just on Saturday. So I thought it'd be a great opportunity. I got involved with that. And on our very first meeting, one of the leaders said, "Hey, every year we give away this money and there's a real need on our campus. What would it look like for us to build something here?" And so I got involved with what was a project that we called Home Safe, that was building the first violence prevention and resource center on campus. And to me, that was really one of the first places that I kind of learned about the entrepreneurial journey, right? Solving a problem. What is a problem? How do I solve it? And not knowing what it looked like along the way and just kind of throwing it in. And I ended up working there full time, like working there as my second full-time job by the time I was a senior in college.
Wow.
They hired me to do their education, outreach, and marketing and communication pieces. So I stayed busy with that. Then my master's degree, I moved on to organizational communication with an emphasis in gender work because I thought that was fascinating and that had kind of been my path, and I knew I wasn't quite done with school. And on the very first day at Texas A&M, my mentor sat me down and looked at me and goes, "You're not an academic. I'm not sure why you're in this academic program." And I said, "Okay, well, you accepted me into this program. I just moved to Texas. So do we have a problem?" She goes, "No, I think you," she goes, I've read your stuff. She goes, "First, you can't write, so that's a problem." And I said, she goes, "Let me guess, you go in and talk to your professors before you turn in papers." I was like, "Yes." Yes, I do. She's like, yeah, I could tell. And she goes, the second is, she goes, you've got a lot of great ideas. Clearly you are fascinated by the world. She goes, but I could tell that you're not, that you're going to need to go out. And she said, get beat up a little bit. And I said, okay, I'm not sure what that means. And she goes, well, before you land in academia. And so she actually gave me my very first consulting contract. She goes, I have a project for you. They were starting, she had read my resume. They were starting a gender center on A&M's campus. She goes, I need an analysis of all of the mission and value statements for all the other centers on university campuses.
Wow.
So that I can bring that to the board. We're willing to pay X amount. We were setting aside for a consultant. Would you be willing to do that? Loved it. Absolutely loved the work. And I think that was like, again, just another kind of iteration. And I ended up working in a nonprofit to start with, came out of graduate school and started working at a domestic violence center here on campus in Phoenix. And then very quickly realized, like, I remember being actively told, like, no, we just sit and wait for money to come in. And there was something about it that just didn't work for me. And so I looked around and said, I know I love community. I know I love giving back. And one of the things I recognized very quickly was all of the people who were giving back, I mean, actively on the board, building out, fundraising, doing things, were women business owners. And I noted that and said, how might I help that community? And what does that look like? So that looked like a couple of different iterations. It looked like then working for somebody who had a women's coaching firm, then starting my own marketing firm that specialized in working in women's entrepreneurship. And then I ended up sort of stumbling into a job with a small business development center. They needed to have me come in and help with a particular project that continued to grow. And that was really my first foray into economic development work and working with entrepreneurship in more of a formal capacity outside of my own job as an entrepreneur. So then I grew and had a marketing firm named Three Dog Marketing that we sold. I had a consulting firm where I worked with business incubators across the country. And then fast forward, the last kind of major milestone on the story was one of my major efforts in Phoenix was with my consulting firm. I was traveling a lot and I was having conversations nationally that sounded like, yes, we need more brilliant minds, no matter who they are, at the table to get the greatest value. And then I'd come home to Phoenix and I wasn't getting the same traction. I wasn't getting the same feedback. And so I started kind of a local grassroots initiative. So how come I could network every hour of every day at a women's event in Phoenix, but we're not moving the needle in the same way other parts of the country are? And so that's when I actually started working with what at the time was Entrepreneurship and Innovation, so the team within ASU. And it was kind of my moonshot project. We executed the largest research study of women business owners in the state of Arizona and created a report from that. And I was also pregnant with my second child at the time, had given birth and then gave birth to my son. 2 weeks later, we released the report. So I was on stage after giving birth, looking like a hot mess, right? But I was like, we will get that report out. Like I am hell or high water, because it took so many amazing volunteers to make that happen. I was like, so me giving birth is not going to stop the release of this report by any means. And the leader of the team at the time, Jimmy Choi, came up to me afterwards and she said, that's amazing work that you've done here. Let's talk about, your future, what that looks like. I have a project coming up. And she knew I was from the West Valley. And she said, I need some support with that. And so that's how I became part of the Edson Entrepreneurship and Innovation team, have been here for 5 years, part of the ASU Entrepreneurial Ecosystem, supporting out a diversity of entrepreneurs and helping build entrepreneurial ecosystem. And my role here at ASU has really taught me a lot about that cross-section of the academic piece that I enjoy, which is thinking strategically, evidence-based approaches, having, thought process and being really strategic around how we build communities. How do we support entrepreneurs? How do we do that from an inclusive lens? That's really been the gift in working here, and it's still allowed me to do the level of impact that I care deeply about, and really helping to empower and provide that power of entrepreneurship to any innovator who wants to solve a challenge out in the world. So that's kind of the abbreviated, non-abbreviated version of my journey.
Okay, so I've known you for several years and I learned so much about you, but two things. One, I have a whole new appreciation for you being pregnant and releasing research and reports and all of the data related to such an important topic. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that it was a lot and a piece of like the the key there was I was really bad at being pregnant, and I was really bad at like I'm not somebody, like, literally it was like they're like, well, you can't work for 4 weeks, and I was like, well, that sounds awful.
Yeah.
And so what, I'm just gonna sit and stare at this kid, like, that kid's
Right.
not even doing anything. He's just sitting there. I could do stuff. So it was 100% like my, like, yep, because I giving birth, not fun for those of us who haven't done it. It's not great. So
Right.
it was definitely like a, okay, well, I can focus on this piece of it. But also it was just I had such an appreciation at the time, especially, like I said, that was really truly a community project. So if it wouldn't have been for the fact that there were so many amazing, a team really that had created that, I
Right.
just happened to be the first person that kind of sat at the table. And so it probably wouldn't have been if it wasn't for the fact that I was doing very little work of that, like, final push. And we really had so many people contributing to it that all I had to do is, you know, tape up my shirt so that it looked decent and, squeeze myself into some yoga pants to get down to an event. So that was it
But
was
you
an
really
interesting journey.
you gave birth to like two, right? I
Both of
mean,
them, yes.
right. It's like
One,
giving birth.
I'll let anybody guess which one was more painful. Like, like it was the coin flip at any given moment.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so what I heard, something I heard you talk about was entrepreneurial ecosystems, and it's fascinating what that is and how that comes together. And you are the master expert at this. So, can you talk a little bit about what is an entrepreneurial ecosystem and why is it important in a community?
Yeah, so it's first, it is a term that we probably say too often, right? Because and especially now, it definitely has a jargony feel to it. So I will say lots of different people often mean different things because it is
True.
a buzzword, right? So you'll hear people say, well, the ecosystem, right? How I define entrepreneurial ecosystem, and what the field defines entrepreneurial ecosystem as, is we have now gone through different waves of understanding how to support and help entrepreneurship. There is a growing field that now is looking at and understanding that it isn't the development or support of one individual entrepreneur, but the greatest indicator for an entrepreneur's success or multiple entrepreneurs' success within a given community is a plethora of resources, a dense network of
Mm,
people, all committed to working towards supporting that entrepreneur, right? And so a dense network of peers, mentors, resources, and the most important element that makes an entrepreneurial ecosystem different from other approaches to entrepreneurship is not just a list of are those things there, but how do they interact?
mm,
And how does the flow of information occur, and does it occur evenly across that? And so that's really what makes a thriving entrepreneurial ecosystem. So an entrepreneurial ecosystem is all of the elements: knowledge, skills, peers, mentors, support processes that go into a community that builds a culture that allows for a quick flow of those elements across a diverse community of innovators.
that is awesome. And it's integrated, right?
Correct.
Which
Yes.
is the power really in all of that. It's so integrated.
It is, and it pulls from an, I'm an analogy person, and so, it literally comes from biology and understanding that originally, and this was the example that makes sense, right, to me, was originally when we were trying to help animals that were endangered, right? At the end of the day, we were looking at this one specific animal,
Right.
but what they figured out is if we took, whatever animal, let's pretend it's, a rare wolf, right? And we just take those, breed them in captivity, and then release them into the wild, the chances of them surviving without changing any of the environment are very
Mhm.
slim,
Right.
right? We have to consider that animal's food source, how it interacts with the food, how it interacts with the environment. Have we changed the environment? How about the relationship between the wolves, right? And how do we
Right.
make sure that they're not in? So it's highly integrated. I think it is a change to be the different waves of the different waves of economic development, and they usually categorize it by three different waves. Um, Three different waves that have looked at it was, traditionally, let's bring the big companies in, right? And then there was another wave that was like, okay, what if we also help, build small business owners and bring big companies in? And this third wave is also this added layer of how do we think more holistically about entrepreneurs, the environment that they're part of, the big companies, the middle companies, and the small companies. And one of the things that they talk about a lot at Kauffman Foundation that I completely agree with is entrepreneurship at the end of the day is a community sport. And however you define entrepreneurs, right? And we define it very broadly. That includes artists, people like yourself, right? Small business owners. If you are taking an innovative idea, moving it forward to solve a problem, you are an entrepreneur, right? And so the more people we can get to think entrepreneurially within a community and thinking holistically about their journey and the resources they need, the more a community thrives, the more a community is resilient. And we especially saw that in COVID time, right? That it wasn't just one element that we could pull a lever and hope that put some money towards those businesses and things would solve. We really had to think about the levels and the integration of all of these systems and how do we support the totality of our communities.
Such a powerful vision and a visual, right? You talked a little bit about this right now, but also I wanted to pull this out of your bio, which is place-based innovation spaces, which are part of this ecosystem and a powerful one. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so one part of my portfolio, and because I am part of the J. Orrin Edson Entrepreneurship and Innovation Institute, so part of ASU, and we're kind of a unique institute that's housed within ASU with the vision of giving access to entrepreneurship, because entrepreneurship is across ASU. It's part of our design aspirations. It's part of Michael Crow's vision and our charter, which really does at ASU. We live it, we breathe it, we operate from it all the time. My team was designed to help because we have entrepreneurship across every aspect of the university, from the design school all the way through to the facilities management. And so our team was created to help ensure that there's access and kind of cohesion across all of these elements within ASU for entrepreneurship and innovation. Now, an important part of our charter is also, if you look up ASU's charter, it's very good. The last sentence is we take a social and economic responsibility for the communities in which we are embedded. So the idea is that ASU is of the community, we create knowledge for social good, that we're creating a practice and we're part of the community. So all of that is background to say that an element, or the way that our team expresses that, is through a series of place-based innovation spaces. Currently, we have 5, and the general idea is, again, it's a density of network and a piece of those resources that entrepreneurs need, an element within the ecosystem to really thrive. So of our 5 spaces, and we call them place-based innovation spaces because each of them is very unique depending on the needs of the community. The idea is you can probably walk into each and get a feel for each of them. Our coffee pots are the same. That we're going to have the same kind of setup and rules, but each of them is highly localized depending on the community and the community's needs that are part of it. They also serve as a conduit between university and all of the innovation that comes from being, the number one in innovation for 8 years. There's brilliant ideas, students, thinkers, ideas that are within the university. How do we make sure that there's a collision point between all of that brilliance and the communities that we're embedded in? And our place-based innovation spaces were really designed to be a conduit for that. So for any of our spaces, you can hold entrepreneurial events for free, as long as the events are free and open and accessible for everybody. You can come and do collaborative workspace, meaning that bring your laptop. It's not a co-working space. You can't sit down and work all day and not talk to people. They're designed where you're going to meet people and you're going to be able to sit and interact, but still have a level of focus that is needed for entrepreneurship. And then third, all of our spaces are creatively designed to encourage innovation, meaning they're flexible in design, they're hybrid by its nature, they're creative. And so all 3 of those things happen in our spaces. We've got a team of I think 5 different community managers that manage those spaces, that make them available to community members and kind of activate them as part of all of the communities in which ASU is embedded.
Is that only in Arizona, those 5?
Currently, the 5 are in Arizona. They're in the across the Phoenix metro area. And our team, again, that's a piece of it, similar to what you've seen even in the West Valley. We even have partnerships that are outside of that place-based network. And so we are very focused on how do we make sure that, again, we meet the community needs. And there's a couple of communities that don't necessarily need a standing physical space yet, right? They're not there in their development. So we do have partnerships and projects in other cities. But those 5 are currently in the Phoenix area. But, ASU is a national model, so there'll definitely be opportunities, and we do partake in a couple of different spaces, including in Washington, D.C., and ASU now has a building in LA as well that we help program and activate.
Okay. When you were talking about these 5 areas, I was thinking about, we just had Microsoft the last few years come into the state, right? And bring their data centers and jobs. And before they even started to build, because the groundwork had been laid by ASU in terms of thinking about community, they came in and they held a community town hall to say, we want to know, what can we do? We want to invest in the community before we get here. We know we're bringing jobs and we're investing in that, but what can we do to invest in what this community needs, where these data centers will sit? And then put action behind it, put funding and investment and action. And it was very encouraging to the community. The community felt this strong fabric of connectivity to this new organization coming in. So there's so much power in that place-based strategy.
It is, and the role of a university across the board is often to be a convener, right? We're not entrepreneurs. And one of the things that we know about in entrepreneurial ecosystem building is it's important to know what your role is, right? And there has been other universities that take more of a central role, and it doesn't work out necessarily because of the power dynamic that's involved with that. But as a convener, we have the power to bring some of those organizations to the table, right? And to say, hey, to be part of this community, what are your anticipations, right? So we get to set, some of the values, which is why I think that the charter within ASU and the work we do is so powerful, is because we often serve as an advocate. How are you giving back? What does it look like for you to mentor? How are you talking to our students? How are you talking to our local entrepreneurs? And so we often even facilitate those. And last week, 2 weeks ago, participated in Innovation Night, right? Very similar. Yep, TSMC, if you're going to be part of this community, the community needs to understand you. You need to understand the community. So ASU has served as a convener in a variety of ways to make sure that we can kind of facilitate that knowledge transfer and that conversation amongst the community. And I think we still have a lot of work to do. One of the great things about Phoenix is, it is a relatively new ecosystem. It is still a relatively new community. We've done a lot of great work. And if I had a magic wand, one of the things I would love to see more of is there's still a pretty decent gap between mid-size and large companies and the local community. Would love to see further conversations. And I think right now it is still very transactional at times. People see it as like, oh, well, we'll reach out to them when we want sponsorship for something. And I think we just haven't had the muscle memory yet to know what else could we ask for? What is a more innovative approach? What does partnership really look like? The more we continue to grow and explore and are open to innovative ideas around it, the more I think we're going to have that kind of connective tissue that really builds out all of those layers of the ecosystem effectively to help that flow from entrepreneurs, starts, small businesses, all the way up to the larger guys.
Did you see that in Texas, or have you seen that model where the fabric is tight with that? Have you seen that?
Oh yeah, there's a couple of communities that many people often will point to as great examples of, network density. So I mean, you have, and this is one of the things in the field. Originally, they started with obviously San Francisco, right? And it was like, okay, what was the Bay Area model there? And they said, how do we replicate that? Now, the Bay Area and that model is not without its challenges, right? That model works really well for a very small demographic of people. And so now they've started looking at, okay, what are some of the other cities? And so, traditionally outside of looking at how do we just take San Francisco and make other Silicon Valleys and other places, right? New York, Boston have always been, hotbeds. Chicago's another one. But for me, what's more interesting is the ones that are now looking at how do we develop that same density of networks, that same thriving entrepreneurial ecosystem. And when I say these cities, the way I describe it is, as somebody who travels, what are the cities you want to travel to, right? Austin. How many people have you talked to in the last year that have been to Denver, right? That are going to Colorado Springs is a really great example. Chattanooga, Tennessee, seeing some great things out of Nashville, right? And so, you can tell when an entrepreneurial ecosystem is thriving because they're places you want to travel to, meaning they've got good food, they've got a good art scene, they've really been able to embrace a lot of the elements that make entrepreneurship and make a community thrive. And it kind of works all the way up the chain. So those are a couple of the examples. I could tell you when we look at other similar numbers, so we do a lot of cross comparison to the Phoenix metro area, we pull from Salt Lake a lot. Chattanooga, Tennessee is the other example that are probably the two prime ones that we often refer to. I've seen some really great work come out of Albuquerque. So Albuquerque, New Mexico has got some really cool projects that are up and running. And I think, again, the opportunity of the field is we know we have a pretty good feel of, hey, here's where some of these things are working. What is working there that is transferable to other communities in a way that is authentic and scalable, and is measurable, is what is currently on the cutting edge of the discussion of entrepreneurial ecosystem building and entrepreneurship. And so that's where we're still having, I think, some interesting discussion that we're looking at, is how do we do that effectively?
Awesome. I feel like we could talk about this for 3 days. So I'm minimum 3 days. So couple last questions, because I feel like you've given the audience and our listeners so much information. I can't wait for them to go find you online, find all the cool things that you're working on, all the opportunities that they can engage at the local level. So let's talk about people who are thinking about entrepreneurship or thinking about advancing in their career and taking on this journey. What advice would you give them? What's a lesson learned, maybe?
Great question. And I'll tie it into two different things. And I think the most, because I know your podcast and hopefully the people still listening to us, right, that haven't tuned us out, are often great leaders, right, within organizations. And one of the things that I would immediately say is an important element is that the entrepreneurial mindset, how to approach things, is equally as important as entrepreneurship. And if you are a leader within a company that is not thinking about what is the next trend, problem that nobody is solving and how to move forward, that's honestly why we see most companies either wither and die or not get past that initial startup stage, right? And when I say startup, I mean like a small business, if you were, and usually it's right at $1 million where you'll hit, right, that kind of window where you really need to think innovatively about what is the next opportunity, how are we going to rapidly scale up. That entrepreneurship and that entrepreneurial mindset and entrepreneurial spirit is really critical for any organization, right? And of all those elements I talked about, if you're listening to this, you're like, it's interesting, but what the hell do I care about an entrepreneurial ecosystem? The idea is that no matter what organization you are part of, the size, nonprofit, for-profit, complexity, that flow of resources, that flow of innovation, that flow of ideas is critical for you to stay on the cutting edge. And if anything, especially what staying on the cutting edge does, and what we learned during COVID, is things can be going along great, but if you're not looking forward thinking, the level of resilience is just non-existent, right? Like all it takes is one change in the system and you're kind of cut on your heels, right? We're even seeing big tech companies, right, that are have got kind of complacent in their entrepreneurial thinking, and here we are, right? So I would say for anybody, whether you're in your career, you're looking at a re-career, I would encourage them to let go of the way that it needs to look, right? And instead focus on, and this is what we teach in the entrepreneurial mindset, what is a problem you're passionate about solving? How do you solve that problem in a way that works for the people you're solving it for, and find a market fit for that, right? And that can look, I work for the man, right? At times it's working for the man, right? And it looks a lot of different ways in the journey. It might not even be starting your own venture, right? It might be rethinking your current business you're part of or rethinking your role. But the more that you can kind of identify what is that problem, and the more you can listen, right? Who has this problem? how do I solve it for them? How do I think innovatively or differently about how to solve it for them versus telling them what I think it needs to look? I think the entire world can benefit from that entrepreneurial spirit to solve problems, but especially as an individual, it frees you from having specific timelines or taglines that are so limited, because right now the world looks so many different ways.
Right.
So really it's that embracing of the entrepreneurial mindset and that entrepreneurial approach of solving problems. Don't get attached to what it looks like. You listen deeply and just keep iterating and figuring it out, knowing that failure, which is a tough one for a lot of people, especially for a lot of women, is part of the game. And it's not that you have to be okay with failing, just fail small, right? And learn from it and keep moving forward.
So I'm thinking how timely this is, because whether, every day it changes, whether we're in COVID or not, or we're going into a recession or we're already in one, that entrepreneurial mindset for those problems that are in our environment right now is key for people being resilient and be successful in the midst, right? They have to, they will all have to keep that entrepreneurial mindset moving into 2023, regardless of how all this unfolds.
You got it. And I think that sometimes the negative, and in the last couple of years, we've gotten so accustomed to trauma bonding.
Right.
Like by focusing on the negative, right? And that's how we kind of interact with each other now, that it's hard to get into that solution. So it's, how do you recognize, yep, this is happening in the environment, this is a problem, but here's where we can create a solution. And I think that is really like, and what does that solution look like? And how do you learn to operate knowing like, yep, this is a challenge, get into that solution mindset and keep moving forward is a valuable asset, especially going into the new year and whatever might come next for us as a group.
Exactly. Okay, let's finish with who's your hero.
Good question. So I am prone to hero worship in the way that I didn't like grow up with somebody that I was like, oh, that's my hero, right? And so I do, like, every week I will hear somebody new doing something cool. It's an occupational hazard, and I'll be like, that is cool and brilliant, and I love it. I listen to different podcasts that I'll then, like, I'm a podcast listener, and I'll be like, this is the coolest person I've ever heard, right? And I get very prone to hero worship. So I do have a lot of heroes. If I had to say one that's always consistently like showed up for me, I am an Arizona girl, so Sandra Day O'Connor. I've heard her speak. I was privileged to be able to hear her speak a couple of times. She had, to me, that like Arizona independent cowgirl kind of spirit that really spoke to me. She was very straightforward. I saw her, towards the end where she was very like, I remember somebody asking her like on a panel that you could tell she did not want to be part of this bullshit panel. Like, and that was literally like, she like said it, like, I don't want to be part of this bullshit panel. That like she was talking about, so it was like, you've said, people have told you that, women who don't mentor women, she goes, need to burn in hell. Like, that was her answer. I was like, the greatest thing I've ever heard, right? And she goes, but it doesn't need to be a big thing. Just help people. Be nice.
Right.
Fine.
Right.
And so that moment for me was like a big one that, like, if I had to say enduring across my career, I think she's also just another one that was always grounded in who she was and kind of what her values were, and looked a lot of different roles at different times. So a lot of those things to me just really speak to, and at the end of the day, she made history. Like, she is like a fundamental, like, and so in Arizona, we have a couple of them, and she's a big one. So I would say that's probably my my go-to hero answer.
She's also a trailblazer. You both have a lot in common. You have a lot in common with her in terms of blazing new trails and fearless, right?
And inability to cut out curse words. Those would be like the two. And a love of margaritas. That was the other thing that she shared. That was like, oh my God, this woman is my spirit animal.
We're soul sisters.
Yes.
Kristin, it's always good to chat with you. Thank you for all that you shared today. Where can people find you and the great work that you're doing?
You got it. So my name is Kristin, Kristin, slice, like a slice of pizza, SLICE. Lots of different places. Our website for our team is entrepreneurship www.asu.edu, where you can find out about all of our different programs. And there's many pathways that entrepreneurship shows up across the community. LinkedIn's a great place to get hold of me, Kristin Slice on there. And then feel free to follow the Edson Entrepreneurship ASU team on any given social media platform. You can see us on LinkedIn. You can also find us on Instagram. We've got lots of great events, opportunities. When in doubt, feel free to reach out to me, kristin.slice@asu.edu.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you to everybody for listening in.
Brightworks Consulting hosts this podcast and YouTube channel to spotlight the leadership around the world that is changing lives. Brightworks offers a myriad of consulting services in the public and private sector, to include diversity, equity, and inclusion solutions for any size company. You can find us at www.brightworksconsulting.com. We're honored to have Best Companies AZ as a presenting sponsor for this podcast. Best Companies AZ is your #1 source for regional employer branding. You can find them at www.bestcompaniesaz.com.